you guys to just take a part of her story and her journeys thus far through SDL and all that she's learned and done. I'm extremely proud of her. And so I'm excited what the Lord is going to do in her life after this. I think she's going to launch well. And so little technical difficulties. So just watch this screen versus that screen, and I'm sure you can figure that out. But anyway, let's give a warm round of applause to Claire McCormick.
Welcome to my capstone. Thank you all for coming here. Friends, family, strangers, people I kind of know, people I don't really know. I have always enjoyed art. In kindergarten, I prided myself on my ability to color in the lines. Throughout elementary school, I would slave for hours over any sort of art homework we had to do, earning myself a reputation, an infamous reputation, for taking way too long on any sort of art project we were assigned. In junior high, my homework and quizzes would be riddled with little doodles carefully placed so as not to cover the content of the page. But in high school, the doodles got a little out of control, and they became drawings as they spread all over my quizzes and tests, totally disregarding any sort of writing that wasn't my own. If my life were a novel, one could say this was symbolism for my love of art overtaking my need for perfect grades. One day, I realized that art wasn't just a pastime for me, but something more. What that something else is, I couldn't tell you. But whenever I set pencil to paper, I could totally decompress. It felt a little bit like catching your breath after trying to hold it through the Eisenhower Tunnel. Art is my form of journaling, it's my form of playing, and to the disbelief and disappointment of some of my teachers, it is my form of taking notes. Despite all this, it never occurred to me to pursue art as a career. After all, why would I want to be a starving artist? Second only to my love of art is my love of story, or more specifically, storytelling. Now, I come from a family of great adventurers. We've embarked on some pretty epic travels together, starting when I was a kid. But as many of you adults may know, traveling with kids is not easy, and my parents found that the easiest way to keep us happy and under control was to tell stories. I still remember filing behind my dad with my two brothers as he began to tell the epic space tales of Captain Nicanor, Warrior Didas, and Princess Clarina. I'll let you guess which one was me. These were our battle pseudonyms. The only rule in the family was that when we stopped hiking, the story had to be put on pause. No exceptions. We hiked for miles that way at a death march. I still remember struggling to keep up with my dad over slippery shale on these treacherous saddles in between mountains, even as my mind was going at light speed through an asteroid belt. If Dad planted the seed, then Connor, my older brother, cultivated and helped it grow. Connor moved ahead of a little hiking group one day, and he began to tell his own stories of the space crew, with Grant and I following faithfully behind. We all got to contribute to the stories and the characters, and it was then that I realized how fun it is to tell stories. But Connor was the best. Thanks to Connor, our family travels were quickly overtaken by hours and hours of listening to him tell hilarious stories and skits with countless puppets, clay creations, imagination, and even woolly seatbelt covers, which I have here. This is Clout, this is Doug, and this is Mr. Dodo. Each had a very specific character that we all eventually grew to love, even though they were just little floppy things. As I grew, I began to have my own endeavors into storytelling, but only to myself. Stories that would play like movies before my eyes, be it at home, on a hike, or often during class. Don't tell anyone. Eventually, I decided to try to share my stories with people by creating hard copies. It usually didn't go so well. My hands were too small to type, and anytime I tried to write it out by hand, I'd become a little distracted, and a couple hours later, I'd have this magnificent drawing and no words on the page. I kept stories to my head from then on, but my desire to share my stories continued to grow, especially after I made friends with one Anna Colby. As a best friend, she was a best friend that taught me the joy of experiencing imagination with someone else. I wanted to share my imaginings with the rest of the world, to invite them into the splendors of imagination that is only often cherished by kids. It wasn't until junior year that I figured out how I could do this. My dream was fully realized when my dad and Connor approached me after entering a competition to create a device that would make commuting on a bike safer. In order to pitch the idea, they needed an animated video. So they came to me and asked me what I could do. I was thrilled, and I was really, really nervous, but I immediately set to work. It took me something like 20 hours to finish it. I worked all through the night, well, not all through the night. I worked till 4 in the morning, slept for 2 hours, up at 6, and kept working throughout the day. I even worked in chapel, which made Tidwell take my iPad away. And after a few tears, I managed to convince the sweet office ladies to give me back my iPad so I could finish it. I barely got it in on time. If you could play that. I'll keep you entertained until it begins. Oh, that's not it. Don't look.
Bicycle and pedestrian safety is very important. And yet, in Colorado, there were 100 deaths in 2016 alone. According to CDOT, 72% of pedestrian fatalities happen at night, and 78% happen in urban areas. Unsafe driving is often to blame, with drivers either unaware of nearby bicyclists and pedestrians or distracted by their devices and their passengers. So how can we fix this problem and make our roads safer for everyone? Dr. John W. Senders from the University of Toronto published The Attentional Demand of Automobile Driving, where he noted that it is not that drivers decided when to look at the road, but rather that the road demanded from time to time that the driver look at it. What if our roads could demand that drivers pay attention to pedestrians and bicyclists? The good news is there is a solution that can do this. It can be used by everyone with no additional training. It can connect with existing traffic infrastructure, and it can be scaled to multiple locations. To implement this solution, all we have to do is combine 2 existing technologies that CDOT already uses. We need flashing signs and FLIR TraffiSense cameras. TraffiSense is a thermal imaging camera that can be used to detect cars, pedestrians, and bicyclists, and is already installed at intersections throughout Colorado. By connecting TraffiSense to an LED sign, we can alert drivers when pedestrians and bicyclists are present. We call this technology smart signs. This way, when a driver comes to a stop at a light, the flashing sign will encourage them to make one last effort to survey their surroundings for the safety of others. The smart signs will be even more visible and effective at night. Eventually, smart signs can be used to alert drivers on rural roads as well. With this technology installed at intersections throughout Colorado, drivers will be more aware, and pedestrians and bicyclists will be safer.
Tired of lugging around big bags of pet food and litter? Get it?
That's not mine. That took me a really long time. And by the time I turned this in, I was exhausted, snappy, and a little sick to my stomach. Very sick to my stomach. But I've never had a better time in my life. It was after this that I knew what I wanted to be, an animator. Realizing what I wanted to do was one thing. Finding the time to do it was another entirely. It was becoming increasingly difficult for me to squeeze in art and story as my schedule ballooned with homework and extracurricular activities. Rather than feeling facilitated by the school, I was feeling hindered, and my usual love of learning was waning under the realization that I was being held back from starting my future right away. My frustration grew with each passing day, as I was told again and again that what I was being taught was preparing me for my future. And it was, but for the college part of my future. But I wanted to start learning immediately, to make connections, and to begin animating. I knew I could do it, so why wait? I was going crazy, and by the end of the year, I had decided that I would drop out of senior year. I learned 2 things about myself then. One, that I don't really believe that grades or a diploma are what makes someone intelligent or capable. And 2, that I was willing to go to any length, even social disgrace and disadvantage, to reach my goals. The same week that I decided that senior year was not for me, I learned about an amazing opportunity that Front Range has to offer. It's why my speech is so ridiculously long. Anyway, that opportunity is a program that Mr. Cooper designed called the Student Directed, or as Mr. Wall said, Student Designed Learning Year. The name is rather self-explanatory. The student designs a customized curriculum of 4 classes: science, math, history, and literature, each built around the specific subject. It pulls from regular classes and gives them the time they need to make connections and to pour into whatever field of study they choose, while being supported by the school. Obviously, I think, I chose animation. I was thrilled that such a program was available. Not many schools, not many adults trust students to be in charge of their senior year. Admittedly, these doubts were initially well-founded, at least in my case. Going into this, I had no concept of initiative, of leadership, or of patience. But with help from my friends and the school and my parents, I slowly learned all of these things, and I learned the difference between self-motivation and self-discipline. I began to see things I could animate all over the place. Things like the flicker of a candle, or a dog running into a tree, or an old man sitting alone at a park. These beautiful, and sometimes not beautiful, snippets of life, of stories, stick with me. I quickly confirmed my suspicion that animation is one of the best ways to tell a story. It turns even the driest of tales into a shining performance, and it can capture the sweetest of moments in a few frames. Only the extent of your imagination can dictate how far you take an idea. To me, this is a beautiful concept. And as the year began, I was thrilled to be learning and exploring the capabilities of animation. While the power of an animated story can be tremendous, when you're a beginner, sometimes you have to start small. And you can't always inspire dramatic emotion with your animations. And sometimes you just have to animate a dancing carrot, if that works. Get ready. This is gonna be good. Voila! I was so proud of my dancing carrot, but as I continued to explore and research animation, I realized a few things. First, there are countless industries I could go into with my animation. Second, it is very competitive to become an animator, especially at places like Pixar. And third, I saw how talented other animators were and how far I had to go. I compared myself to others left and right. Pretty soon, it became a habit for me to look at an artwork and compare it to mine, rather than enjoy it or learn from it. I began to have doubts as to whether I could do this or not. I didn't have the confidence to pull this off, the experience, or the knowledge. Perhaps it would be better or easier to just become a nurse or a teacher, 2 things that I had considered in the past. By fall break, I didn't want to be an animator anymore. I didn't think I could do it, and I didn't seem to be improving. Laying in bed one night, staring at the ceiling and contemplating my existence, I was overwhelmed with fear for my future. And suddenly I realized how young and inexperienced I really am. So naturally, I asked my mom to tuck me in. Since I was a kid, she has sung this sweet song that for the longest time I didn't realize was a Bible verse. And when she sang it over me then, I had an epiphany. The verse was Isaiah 40:31. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. I had no reason to hope, and my hopelessness was leeching me of my passion. This verse reminded me that I don't get my hope and my inspiration from myself, but from God. And I needed to trust Him with what I held most dear to my heart at the time, my passion, my dancing carrot. Of course, even after I realized this, I had a very difficult time handing over all the control to God. And it's been a work in progress, but I've learned an extremely valuable lesson. I cannot do anything without hope in the Creator of everything. Going hand in hand with my insecurities was my impatience. Animating anything can take a very long time. I learned that it takes a team of 3 professionals 8 weeks to finish a 1 to 2 minute video. If that were the case, then it was bound to take me, inexperienced and on my own as I was, about a year to finish one short video. And that's just in 2D, not 3D. Through my studies, I learned that aside from time, there are other differences between 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. 2D animation is what is made on one plane with only the x and the y-axis, basically up and down, left and right. To any of you who have been in algebra, you know that. That's most of you. 3D animation is built with a third dimension, the z dimension, which is forwards and back. It's depth. It's the difference between a square and a cube. Think of the way old Disney princesses movies looked like Princess and the Frog and Frozen. Mr. Probst. Ignore that. Princess and the Frog, not Frozen, and Snow White. Then think of how Disney movies look now with Tangled and Frozen. That's 3D. I didn't realize that making a 3D video on my own and with so little time and experience would be next to impossible. All I had to go off of was a video that one man did. Many of you have probably seen this video, and you may also know that the man who made it instantly was offered a job by Pixar, if you could get that up. This is a very distant, but hopefully real goal of mine, to work at Pixar. The reason I show you this is because this video perfectly captures everything I love about animation and admire about animation. The story is short and succinct and so sweet. Well written in that way. But this animation's greatest strength is that it tells its story visually, a story that could not have been told the same way if it was written down.
Hey guys, how's it going? Today I want to show you my awesome new Wix website. It's got everything I love all in one place.
That's not it.
Let me show you guys.
Hey, sweetie. Sorry I got home so late. But I had to pick something up after work. It's such a beautiful day outside. You should let some sun inside. So, is it better? Why don't you stop playing and open the present I got for you? For me? Hello? Oh, yes, sir. I don't know why you didn't get the papers.
Okay. Whoa! Cool! You gotta be kidding me. Get lost! Ah. outside.
Illuminates the past. My heart just
The way that the story revealed that he's missing his leg at the end couldn't have been done the same way with words. It could only have been done with pictures. After watching this and being so inspired, I thought that 3D would be really easy. After all, it was only one man who did it. But if it was that easy, we'd all be doing it, and I wouldn't be talking to you now. It turns out there's a reason that the credits are so long after a 3D animated video, or movie. It's because it takes a billion specialties to create even the simplest of scenes. To give you an idea, let me show you this shot. This is a shot from Finding Nemo. Each shape you see there started as a point, and each point became a line, and each line became a shape. An entire team was dedicated to just creating those, whether it's a rock or a character. Next, they went in and began to give everything entirely different textures and surfaces. Yet again, that was another group. After that, the lighting process. The lighting process alone is enormous. It's kind of hard to see here because it's so dark. But if you squint, you can see a pattern on the coral, the pattern of light. That had to be specifically coded to mimic the light that you see at the bottom of water. Lighting can completely change how a scene looks and feels. You may also notice that up close, the corals are rich in color, but as you get farther away, they lose that color, first losing their red wavelengths, then their green wavelengths, which is common, it's normal in water. And it gives you that depth. This didn't just happen, but it had to be intentionally animated by tons of people. And all of this is done even before adding rigging and movement and sound and so many things. And it just emphasized that me, completely inexperienced and on my own, was kind of lofty of a goal of me to want to create a 3D video by the end of the year. So I had to stick to 2D. Because I wanted to start a 3D video as soon as possible, I was a little disappointed at first that I had to do 2D. But the more I worked with 2D, the more I loved it. I began to plan a 2D video in a software called After Effects, but it wasn't going as fast as I had expected, and I wanted to do more. I was surrounded with inspiration and bursting with ideas. There had to be a simpler and faster way of doing this. But I finally found one, frame-by-frame animation. And I found an app that helped me do it on my iPad. While not the sleekest, it served its purpose well. I began to animate anything I could think of, simple things like hair blowing in the wind or a flower opening up. Or even once, our chapel speaker. But don't tell anyone, they may take my iPad. I soon learned that frame-by-frame animation was the animation for me. Through this, my first full animation was complete. In this animation, I experimented with layers and simple line drawings, choosing to emit color from the equation. Hopefully it'll play. I learned that planning ahead really helps. And there you have it. Like I said, I learned that planning ahead really helps. You may have noticed that the diving board kind of moved away from him. Yeah. That wasn't supposed to happen, but I'm going to pretend it was. And I learned that creativity can be best utilized when given boundaries. In my next animation, I decided to mess around with color. I drew each frame and colored it as I go. This turned out to be a kind of inefficient way of doing things. And that's that. This one took the longest, but it was one of my favorites. In this, I realized that color can completely change a scene. It can be used to set the mood, to focus the attention, and even to act as a character or a plot point, as it did in that one. This means that color can also be used as a distraction and is best used with thought and purpose. And it explains why artists will often use color palettes. Eventually, I figured out that the best way to go about coloring an animation is to first draw the frames, and then to go back and color them on another layer. This was my result. And that was that. When I wasn't frame by frame animating on my own, I was in downtown Denver working with some of the best animators in Colorado. The company is called Studio Hippo. They make beautiful 2D animations for advertisements for businesses. I would keep them in mind. My dad was the one who initially tracked them down and contacted them, asking if they'd be willing to meet with me about twice a month to mentor me. They actually accepted, Lord knows why. I couldn't believe it. But then suddenly, Dad turned over all the responsibility of communicating and meeting with them to me. I don't know why I didn't expect this. My excitement was quickly replaced with nerves as I was about to meet complete strangers, and I had to make a good impression. As soon as I began to drive to our first meeting, I immediately wanted to turn around. I was terrified. I had no idea what I was getting into, and surely this endeavor was doomed to fail. I didn't know it then, but this feeling was one that I would become very familiar with. It was the fear of the unknown. There is no proper way to combat the fear of the unknown. But by the time I was greeted by these 3 smiling faces, I realized that even if things didn't go well from here, I had made it this far, and that in itself was an achievement, a great achievement. Rather than focus on the unknown and on the fear, I made the conscious decision to celebrate my small successes, and that my decisions in the moment were what would control that unknown future. The interview, if you could call it that, was more like a meet and greet, and less like the interrogation I pictured it to be. The 3 employees, Cameron, Austin, and Natalie, soon became good friends and mentors to me. Under them, I learned not only how to animate, but practical lessons like how to work with clients and how to schedule and reschedule meetings, as I practiced a lot. Even though I was tempted to turn around the moment I left for my first interview, I didn't stop, for I will not let fear get in my way. So what if I fail? I'll chase failure. Even though I may be faced with the unknown, I will not let that stop me. I learned to focus on what I can control in the moment and give what I can't to God. Before I could begin animating, I would need a story. There are 3 steps to creating a story. First, brainstorm ideas. Anything you want, there really is no limit to what you can do. Any moral you want. Second, create a 2-column of the story. A 2-column is 2 columns on a page. In the first column, it's a description of the story, written out in detail. Sometimes it's the voice that's overlaid on top. And in the second column, it's a detailed description of what the audience will see or what's being animated. And the third step is storyboarding. To create a storyboard. This was by far my favorite part of the process. I love it, and I really hope I can do it in the future. It's where you draw each and every scene, exactly how it's going to be animated. This is the rough draft of your animation, in a way, and it is often at this point that you realize you need to change an idea or completely disregard an idea. And this is where I believe the saying, went back to the drawing board, comes from. I actually discarded my first idea. Whoops. Sorry. I actually discarded my first idea. I spent the better part of the first semester creating a story going through these 3 steps. In high school, it is very easy to be something that you are not in order to fit in. I saw this everywhere and I wanted to address that in my animations. So I created a story about a little blue-eyed character named Jerry. Jerry's story, and I had pictures but they're gone. Jerry's story starts when he wakes up covered in brightly colored fragments of something. We don't know what it is. He gets up, brushes himself off, and in the distance, he sees a group of people, and they seem to be having fun. He approaches them, wanting to be a part of the fun, and asks if he can join them. But they refuse him. They do not like that his eyes are different, for they all have green noses, which sounds a bit odd. After being turned away, one of them offers him a green nose. If he puts it on, he can be accepted into the group. After much hesitation, Jerry accepts, and he is invited into the group with open arms, and he has an awesome time. After a little while, though, he sees another group in the distance. He rushes to them, and he sees that they all have orange mouths. The process repeats, he's kicked out, and they offer him a mouth. If he looks like them, he will be welcomed. Jerry rushes from group to group to group, changing his appearance over and over again and getting temporary satisfaction, but ultimately ending up unrecognizable. Finally, he approaches one group that he notices their distinguishing feature is one that he's not sure he's willing to give up. They all have purple eyes. He approaches them and they offer him the purple eyes, and he hesitates, for he knows his last distinguishing features is his eyes. It's what makes Jerry, Jerry. But he accepts, and pretty soon he's unrecognizable, a little grotesque even. Everybody laughs at him. They think he looks ridiculous. He has all these brightly colored features, and he quickly tries to rip them away, but they won't come off. And he strains, and finally they come off with a big explosion, because that's fun, and he's knocked unconscious. Later, Jerry wakes up, and he's covered in brightly colored fragments, the fragments of the features that he put upon himself. He brushes himself off and gets up, and in the distance he sees a group. He approaches them, and he sees that, like him, they all have blue eyes, and he's welcomed in with open arms. And as he is enjoying his time, he feels a tap on his shoulder, and he turns around. And he sees another character, but this one has brown eyes. And while his friends are disgusted, Jerry hesitates. It is here that the story ends, and we're left wondering what decision Jerry will make. In this story's conception, I loved it. I thought it was flawless. But when I storyboarded it, I realized that it would be very difficult to animate it without it looking creepy. I mean, he's ripping facial features off. So I spent most of winter break trying to figure out a way I could modify it. In the end, I decided that I would just have to cut my losses and start again. By doing this, I learned the benefits of starting afresh. It inspires new creativity. It reignited my passion. I was excited to get going again. But I also lost the opportunity to create a great animation. Now I know that good things, the best things, often aren't supposed to come easy. It makes me wonder what that first animation would have looked like in the end if I had stuck with it. With a new story in the works, I began designing and drawing my animations. Finally, my ideas were becoming a reality, and I was getting excited. Before I really started chugging along, though, I had to overcome a specific flaw of mine: disorganization. In order to animate efficiently, it is very important to remain organized, something I am very bad at, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. Not pointing fingers or anything. I'm sure I quibbled and quaffled about postponing the inevitable organization day where I'd have to organize all my files. But I soon realized that the best way to stay organized is to just do it. To eat this particular pachyderm one bite at a time. As the year wore on, I continued to be challenged by things outside of animation. Following up on connections was one of those. Something that I have noticed but not appreciated about my dad is his many connections. No matter where we are in the world, we always run into a distant acquaintance of his. His coworker's cousin's brother-in-law's uncle's teacher is in the same industry as him, and Dad follows up on the connection, and boom, he has a friend. Similarly, I found myself surrounded by connections. Everywhere I went, people would get excited when they heard I was an animator or wanting to be an animator. And they'd be like, oh yeah, I know this person who knows this person who knows this person, and they're an animator. And I'd be like, okay, cool, thanks. And I wouldn't follow up on it. Because of this, I missed out on a lot of opportunities to make connections. But one teacher, Mrs. Wiersma, didn't give up on me. She found the connection and she acted upon it, getting me in contact with a friend of her son's, Nathan Billington. Nathan Billington is an animator for a hospital, which sounds a bit odd, but he animates surgeries before they happen so patients can understand what's going on and to relieve stress. There are a few failed attempts to meet, one of which I went to a coffee shop and I introduced myself to some random guy thinking he was Nathan, and he thought I was some girl named Katie. It was really awkward, and I'm traumatized for life. Finally, I sat in a coffee shop waiting once again to meet with a complete stranger. He could be a serial killer, or a kidnapper, or a thug. He was, in fact, none of these things, and the interview went swimmingly. It was very exciting to talk to somebody about something just as passionate about this as me, and I walked away with a veritable treasure trove of advice. One of those things was it is better to get something done before a deadline with 75% quality rather than after a deadline with 100% quality. But what I will always remember the most is that it is not about what you know or even who you know, but it's about how you treat the people that you're with. I began to think about something that my teacher said in speech class. Know your audience. Why do they need to see this video? What will they get out of it? As a Christian, I am called to love others well. 1 Corinthians 13:2 says, I may have the gift of inspired preaching. I may have all knowledge and understand all secrets. I may have all the faith needed to move mountains, but if I have no love, I am nothing. With my actions, my words, my thoughts, and my creations, my animations, I'm required to love others. And in that way, I'm required to animate with purpose. This past fall, my grandpa passed away. This was the first death I have experienced where I'm old enough to really understand what it meant. I never knew how much I loved my grandpa until he was gone. And by then it was already too late. The pain of knowing that I'll never see him again was unbearable. It was a rather overused phrase, but I didn't understand what it meant to really miss somebody until I found myself begging God to have him come back to me. I've never felt pain like that before, and I really miss him. But his life is what should teach us more. It's what should touch us more. This spectacular person changed my lives and countless others just by being in them. It was losing Grandpa that made me realize how little time we have on this earth. But it was his life that made me realize that each and every person has a life as unique and complex as my own. Every person has a story worth hearing, one that has meaning and can reveal a little bit about who God is and who they are. Simply for their stories and for their experiences, people are the greatest inspiration I have, including all of you. It is all of your stories that are worth animating, more so than anything I could possibly come up with. In all the hubbub of life, especially as a senior, it's easy for me to lose sight of why I do what I do and why I love what I love. And if I do that, I lose sight of who I am and who created me. I hope that as I step into this unknown and terrifying future, but frankly amazing future, I'll never lose my inspiration from and my wonder of God. And while you may not have Disney in your future, I invite you all to start asking the same questions I did. Why do you do what you do? And what, or should I say who, do you do it for?